Hi, I'm Isiel Mustafa, and today I'm going to be talking about the United States and World War II. Now, in both World Wars, the United States was a prominent figure in terms of military presence, pressure, influence on Eastern and more European-based warfare. The two most important figures in any war would be the leaders. So, there were two different presidents that served in the whole length of World War II. The first was Franklin D. Roosevelt, who significantly contributed to the war effort by strategically providing the Soviet Union with arms to help another side of the war, despite the shaky conditions that the two were on. The second president, who was in office later in the war, was Harry S. Truman. President Truman was responsible for wrapping up the war by dropping an atomic bomb on Japan, which was, and still is, a controversial decision. Other important figures besides the two presidents were Omar Bradley and George Patton Jr. George Patton Jr. was a general that served during World War II and was instrumental in leading the American Army to victory. Omar Bradley was a U.S. Army officer who was handpicked to lead the Battle of D-Day and was crucial to the successful invasion of Eastern Germany. Now, even before the World War had actually started, America's economy was destroyed right after World War I. That led to a period of time called the Great Depression. While the whole world went through the Great Depression, it originated and started in America. All it was just awful global economy, everything was expensive, and there was no jobs. Just a horrible time to be alive. To build such a large military strength, the US government created the War Draft. The draft, or selective service system, simply required almost all male US citizens and immigrants from ages 18 to 25 to register towards the war effort. Another key part in America's victory in World War II was the Great Alliance formed between the US, Soviet Union, and Great Britain. This alliance was called the Allied Powers and was formed around 1940 to oppose the Axis powers, which consisted of Germany, Italy, and Japan mostly. It was formerly known as the United Nations. A very large part in World War II for America that I feel isn't discussed enough is the technological advancements that were made in World War II. In terms of more combat-oriented inventions and advancements, there was the M1 Garand and the Sherman tank. The M1 Garand was a very reliable semi-automatic assault rifle that gave the U.S. Army soldiers an advantage with higher shot-to-shot recovery compared to the normal bolt-action rifle. The Sherman tank was the most common tank model for not only the Americans, but for British, French, and even Soviet forces. The Sherman tank was good and used so much because they were 1. Mass-produced, and 2. Extremely reliable and rugged. That allowed them to fight for longer than the German tanks. More longer than the German tanks. More advanced form of transportation were key to winning because the whole war was long distance. For example, the aircraft carriers were a huge, if not the main factor. Why? The US stood a chance against Japan's massive naval fleet and was decisive in all American naval victories. Penicillin was also mass-produced and distributed to treat infections in wounded and ill soldiers. This was because in World War I, more soldier deaths were from infection than anything else. Now, after all this background or other information regarding the US and World War II, it's time to get into some key major turning points in the war. The biggest thing, in my opinion, that sparked the flame was the Battle of Pearl Harbor. The Battle of Pearl Harbor was a sudden surprise aerial attack from Japan on Pearl Harbor, naval base located in Hawaii. Now, this decision really pissed off America and destroyed the already awful relationship between Japan and the US. The attack on Pearl Harbor sort of led to the Battle of Midway. The Battle of Midway was huge for America because it really pushed back Japan in terms of naval presence, closing in on America. The battle was only 6 months after Pearl Harbor, and it took place defending the Midway Island naval base over Japanese siege from air and water. American code breakers were able to decipher Japanese naval code that allowed the Navy to anticipate where the siege was coming from and launch their own surprise attacks that eventually led to their victory. Once the US had won the Battle of Midway and had established naval superiority, they started a strategy called island hopping. Island hopping was just the term used for aggressive capturing of smaller islands near Japan while hopping over the bigger, stronger islands. This gave America two crucial things. One was the ability to cut off supply chain to the bigger, stronger islands, and two was giving the U.S. a strong footing near Japanese homeland. Since most islands captured were equipped with airstrips, this gave bomber planes this allowed bomber planes to come within range of the enemy. Now, Battle of Okinawa, huge turning point, sort of wrapped up the war. Really, this is like the last major battle in the war. The Battle of Okinawa had probably the most casualties in World War II, with almost 150,000. The battle itself was important because once the Americans secured a huge piece of land so close to Japanese homeland, they could send a lot more airstrikes a lot more frequently, which really started to wrap things up. With all these American air raids, the Japanese realized they were getting cooked. So once Japan had been thoroughly whacked up with two atomic bombs, sort of marked the end of World War II, considering this all happened after Germany was dealt with. Now, Germany, let's go back. Let's go to Europe real quick. America helped in Europe, but it wasn't for most part. There was a lot of battles that happened in Europe. Most of it was in Europe, but America wasn't directly involved in all of it. What I mean directly, I mean to the scale of the Battle of Okinawa, to the scale of D-Day. What was D-Day? So D-Day, or Operation Overlord, was the invasion of Germany occupied Europe, Eastern Europe, and it was important because it marked a turning point in the war for the Allies, as it was the final push required to end the war. Thank you for watching.